A young man leaves the only home he's ever known, with nothing but a set of coordinates, and what he finds at the end of that journey is not an inheritance, but a choice that will define him forever. If you've ever felt like you were starting from zero with no map for the future, hit that subscribe button. We tell stories for people who know what it's like to build a life from the ground up. The sound a heavy institutional door makes when it closes behind you for the last time is not a bang. It's a soft hydraulic sigh, a final, indifferent exhalation, thump, hiss, then silence. For 18 years, that sound, and 1,000 others just like it, had been the soundtrack to my life. The squeak of worn linoleum under state-issued shoes, the distant clang of a kitchen pot, the murmur of too many kids crammed into too little space. Now there was just the hum of city traffic and the feeling of the sun on my face, a stranger's touch. I stood on the cracked sidewalk outside the Northgate Youth Center, the place I'd called home since I was 3, and felt an emptiness so vast it threatened to pull me apart. In my pocket was a thin, state-issued check for $250, transitional assistance they called it, and in my hand was a single, flimsy manila envelope. My caseworker, Ms. Albright, had handed it to me in her cluttered office just minutes before. Her expression was a practiced blend of professional sympathy and weary resignation. She'd seen hundreds of kids like me age out of the system. We were a statistic, a file to be closed. "Leo," she'd said, pushing the envelope across her desk, "this is it. We've gone through all the records. There are no relatives on file, no trust, no property deeds in your name. Just this." I picked it up. It felt weightless, insignificant. My name was typed on the front. No return address. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "It was left with your file when you were first brought in. The instructions were specific, to be given to you on your 18th birthday. We don't know who it's from." She leaned back, her chair groaning in protest. "Honestly, Leo, don't get your hopes up. It's probably nothing. A letter from someone who couldn't keep you, trying to clear their conscience. The best thing you can do now is focus on the future. Get a room at the transitional shelter, find a job, stay out of trouble." Her advice was practical, sensible. It was the same advice given to every kid who walked out that door. It was advice designed to keep us from drowning, but it never taught us how to swim. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I had spent years dreaming of this day, of freedom, but standing there with the door closing at my back, it didn't feel like freedom. It felt like an eviction. I looked down at the envelope in my hand. It was the only thing in the entire world that was mine, the only thread connecting me to a life before Northgate. I walked until my legs ached, finding a small, grimy park wedged between 2 towering apartment buildings. I sat on a bench, the city's noise a roaring in my ears, and finally, with trembling fingers, I opened the envelope. There was no heartfelt letter, no tear-stained apology. There was only a single sheet of cheap, yellowed paper. On it, a short, typed sentence. "Your grandmother, Eleanor Vance, left you this. It is all she had." Below that, a string of numbers and symbols, a set of geographical coordinates. Eleanor Vance. The name was a ghost, a half-forgotten whisper from a life I couldn't remember. I closed my eyes, trying to summon a face, a memory, anything. All I could conjure was a faint, fleeting sensation, the scent of pine needles and something warm, like cinnamon, the feeling of a hand, rough with calluses but surprisingly gentle, holding mine. Was that even real? Or was it just a story I'd told myself in the dark, a fiction to fill the void where a family was supposed to be? Ms. Albright's voice echoed in my head. "It's probably nothing. A worthless plot of land somewhere." She was probably right. The coordinates likely led to an empty field in the middle of nowhere, a forgotten corner of the state, sold off for back taxes decades ago. The logical thing to do was to crumple it up, toss it in the nearby trash can, and walk to the shelter. Forget the past. Focus on survival. That was the first rule of the system, but I couldn't do it. For 18 years, I had been a ward of the state. My life had been documented in triplicate, my future mapped out on bureaucratic flowcharts. I was a case file, a number, a problem to be managed. This envelope, this name, these coordinates, they were the first hint that I might be something more. I might be a story. I pulled out my phone, a cheap burner I'd bought with money saved from odd jobs. I typed the coordinates into the map application. The screen flickered, zoomed out from the city, and then shot northward, deep into the sprawling green expanse of the Cascade Mountains. A red pin dropped in a vast, dark green area, miles from any town, accessible only by a thin, squiggling line that was probably more of a trail than a road. Worthless land. Maybe, but it was Eleanor Vance's land, and for some reason, that made it mine. In that moment, sitting on a lonely park bench with $250 to my name, I made the first real decision of my life. I wasn't going to the shelter. I was going north. The bus station was a chaotic symphony of hurried goodbyes, garbled announcements, and the smell of diesel fumes and stale coffee. I felt invisible, a ghost slipping through the cracks of other people's lives. I cashed the state's check at a currency exchange window, the teller barely glancing at me as he slid the worn bills under the glass. $250. It felt like both a fortune and nothing at all. At the ticket counter, I said the name of the town closest to the coordinates, a place called Cedar Creek. The agent, a woman with tired eyes and a name tag that read Brenda, squinted at her screen. Cedar Creek? Honey, there's not much up there. Bus runs once a day. You sure? I'm sure, I said with a confidence I didn't feel. The journey was a slow, rattling transition from one world to another. For hours, the bus lumbered through the familiar concrete maze of the city and its sprawling suburbs. I watched the world I knew, the world of gray buildings, crowded streets, and fences, recede in the grime-streaked window. Then, slowly, imperceptibly at first, the landscape began to change. The buildings grew smaller and farther apart. The gray gave way to green. The flat horizon began to buckle and rise, forming foothills that soon swelled into mountains. These were the Cascades, jagged and immense, their peaks still dusted with the last of the spring snow. I had only ever seen mountains in books. They were bigger, wilder, more intimidating than I could have imagined. They made the city, which had always felt like the entire world, seem small and insignificant. I spent most of the ride lost in my own head, replaying the fragments of my life at Northgate, the friendships that were always temporary, broken by adoptions or transfers, the rotating cast of caseworkers and supervisors, their faces blurring into one another, the constant low-level ache of not belonging to anyone or any place. I thought about the other kids who had aged out before me. Some had made it, finding jobs, building small lives for themselves. Many hadn't. They'd been swallowed by the streets, by addiction, by the same cycle of poverty and despair that had landed them in the system in the first place. Was I any different? Was I just running toward another dead end? A more scenic one, perhaps, but a dead end all the same. The bus groaned up another steep incline, and for a moment I felt a wave of pure panic. I should have stayed. I should have gone to the shelter. I should have listened to Ms. Albright. But then I would touch the envelope, still in my jacket pocket. It was a talisman, a compass pointing toward an unknown shore. Whatever waited for me at the end of this ride, it was a piece of my own story, not one written for me in a government file. That thought was enough to quell the fear, or at least to keep it at bay. As the sun began to dip below the western peaks, casting long, dramatic shadows across the valleys, the bus pulled into Cedar Creek. It wasn't so much a town as a loose collection of buildings clustered around a single main street. A gas station, a diner with a flickering neon sign, a general store, and a few houses with peeling paint. The bus hissed to a stop, and the driver called out, "Cedar Creek, end of the line." I was the only one who got off. The air was shockingly cold and clean, smelling of damp earth and pine. It was the smell from my half-remembered dream, and the recognition hit me with a physical jolt. The silence, too, was a presence. It was so profound that I could hear the buzz of the diner's sign and the distant rush of a river. This was a world away from the constant noise of the city. I stood there for a long moment, my duffel bag at my feet, feeling like I had landed on another planet. I had no idea what to do next. The coordinates were still miles away, up in the mountains. I couldn't walk there. I walked into the diner. It was warm inside, filled with the smell of frying bacon and coffee. A few old men sat at the counter nursing mugs and talking in low tones. They all stopped and looked at me as I entered, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. I was clearly an outsider. A young woman behind the counter, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, gave me a tired but friendly smile. "You lost, hun?" "No," I lied, my voice cracking slightly. "I need to get to a place. I have the address." I showed her the coordinates on my phone. She frowned, leaning closer. "Those aren't an address, just numbers." One of the old men at the counter swiveled on his stool. He had a weathered face and a thick gray beard. "Let me see that." I hesitated, then showed him the phone. He squinted at it for a long time. "Well, I'll be," he muttered. "That's the old Vance place, up on Whisperwind Ridge." He looked at me, his eyes sharp. "You family?" "My grandmother," I said. "Eleanor Vance." The man's expression softened slightly. He nodded slowly. "Eleanor, haven't heard that name in a long time. She was a good woman, kept to herself mostly." He turned to the other men. "This is Eleanor's grandson." A murmur went through the small group. I felt my cheeks flush, unaccustomed to being the center of attention, to being connected to a name that people actually recognized. The man introduced himself as Gus. He owned the town's only tow truck and, apparently, served as its unofficial taxi service. After I bought a lukewarm coffee and a stale donut, he offered to drive me. "Roads probably washed out in parts," he warned. "Haven't been up there since before she passed, but the old truck can make it." The ride in Gus's beat-up pickup was bone-jarring. We left the paved road behind and started climbing a steep, rutted dirt track that seemed to cling precariously to the side of the mountain. The forest pressed in on both sides, a dense wall of fir and cedar trees that were so tall they seemed to hold up the sky. The air grew colder, thinner. Gus was mostly silent, concentrating on the treacherous road, but he offered small bits of information. He told me my grandmother had lived up here alone for over 30 years, that she was a herbalist selling remedies and tinctures to people in town, that she was quiet but tough, a woman who belonged to the mountain. "People thought she was strange," Gus said, glancing over at me. "But she wasn't. She was just private. Protecting something, I always figured." "Protecting what?" The question hung in the air between us as the truck clawed its way up the final steep ascent. Finally, the trees thinned, and we pulled into a small, overgrown clearing. There it was, a small cabin, its wood weathered to a silver gray, with a sagging porch and a stone chimney. A dilapidated barn stood a short distance away, its roof half caved in. The place looked less like a home and more like a ruin, a testament to time and neglect. My heart sank. Ms. Albright was right. It was nothing, a worthless, forgotten shack on a worthless plot of land. "This is it," Gus said, shutting off the engine. The sudden silence was absolute. keys usually under the loose flagstone by the steps. Or it used to be. He looked at me, a flicker of something like pity in his eyes. You got supplies. It gets cold up here at night. I shook my head, my throat too tight to speak. I had nothing but the clothes on my back and the dwindling cash in my pocket. Gus sighed, then reached into the back of his truck and pulled out a dusty sleeping bag and a small box of groceries. "Here," he said gruffly. "This'll get you through a night or two. You need to come down, just start walking. Someone will find you." He didn't wait for a thank you. He got back in his truck, navigated a difficult three-point turn, and rumbled back down the path, leaving me alone in the clearing. I stood there for a long time, the sleeping bag and box at my feet, listening to the sound of his engine fade until it was swallowed by the immense silence of the forest. I was completely, terrifyingly alone. A wave of despair washed over me, so powerful it buckled my knees. This was a mistake, a huge, stupid mistake. But then I looked at the cabin again. It was dilapidated, yes, but it was also resolute. It stood its ground against the encroaching wilderness, a small, stubborn piece of human history. It had belonged to Eleanor Vance, my grandmother, and now it belonged to me. Taking a deep breath of the cold, pine-scented air, I walked toward the sagging porch. I found the loose flagstone just as Gus had said. My fingers brushed against the cold, damp earth beneath it, and then I felt it. A small iron key, cool and solid in my hand. It was real. This place was real. Holding that key, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a very long time, a fragile, tentative spark of hope. I put the key in the lock. It turned with a rusty shriek and the door swung inward, opening into darkness. The air that rushed out of the cabin was a physical thing. It was thick with the smells of dust, cold ashes, dried herbs, and old paper. It was the smell of a life left undisturbed, a story paused mid-sentence. I stood on the threshold for a long moment, my eyes adjusting to the gloom. Sunlight filtered weakly through a grime-covered window, illuminating a single, large room. It was sparse, almost monastic. A simple wooden bed with a threadbare quilt was pushed against one wall. A small, pot-bellied wood stove stood in the center, a stack of firewood neatly piled beside it. In the corner was a rough-hewn table and a single chair. A few shelves on the wall held a collection of glass jars filled with dried leaves and roots, alongside a handful of worn books. It was the home of someone who needed very little from the outside world. I stepped inside, my boots echoing on the wide plank floor. I ran a hand along the dusty surface of the table. I could almost picture her sitting here, my grandmother, a woman with a ghost's name and a scent of pine. What had her life been like up here in this profound isolation? Was she lonely? Was she happy? Did she ever think of me? The questions felt impossibly large, the answers forever out of reach. I spent the rest of the afternoon in a kind of daze, exploring my strange inheritance. I opened cupboards, finding a few chipped plates and a single tin cup. I looked through the books on the shelf, field guides to local flora and fauna, books on herbal medicine, a few slim volumes of poetry. Her handwriting was in the margins of one of them, small, precise notes. Seeing it made my chest ache. It was another piece of her, another confirmation that she had been real. As dusk began to settle, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, a deep chill seeped into the cabin. I found matches and managed to get a small fire going in the wood stove. The crackle of the flames and the slow, spreading warmth pushed back against the encroaching cold and my own sense of dread. I ate a can of cold beans from the box Gus had given me, sitting on the floor in front of the fire. The silence of the mountains was no longer terrifying. It was peaceful. For the first time, there were no sirens, no shouting from down the hall, no hum of fluorescent lights, just the whisper of the wind in the tall firs outside and the soft crackle of the fire. I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. I wasn't a case file here. I wasn't a ward of the state. I was just Leo, a boy in a cabin that belonged to his grandmother. I unrolled the sleeping bag on the floor, not wanting to disturb the bed, which felt too much like a sacred space. As I lay there, staring into the dying embers of the fire, my gaze drifted across the floor. My eyes traced the lines of the floorboards, worn smooth by years of use, and then I saw it. Underneath a small, threadbare rag rug near the hearth, one of the boards didn't quite line up with the others. It was just a fraction of an inch off, but in the dim, flickering light, it was noticeable. My heart began to beat a little faster. It was probably nothing, a loose board, a quirk of an old house, but a current of instinct, of primal curiosity shot through me. I crawled over to the rug and pushed it aside. I pressed my fingers against the edge of the board. It wiggled. Using my fingertips, I managed to pry it up. It came away with a soft groan of old wood. Beneath it was a dark, hollow space, lined with cobwebs, and nestled inside that space was a rectangular, dark green metal box. It was an old, military-style ammunition can, heavy and solid. My breath caught in my throat. I reached in and lifted it out. It was heavier than I expected, and a small, rusty padlock held it shut. This was something hidden, something important. A frantic search began. I looked everywhere for a key, in the jars on the shelves, in the pockets of an old coat hanging by the door, under the thin mattress on the bed. Nothing. I was about to give up, to try and pry the lock open with a poker from the stove, when my eyes fell back on the bookshelf. There was one book that was thicker than the others, a detailed botanical encyclopedia. Its spine was slightly cracked. Acting on a hunch, I pulled it from the shelf. Tucked deep within the binding, so flat it was almost invisible, was a tiny, ornate brass key. It was so small, so delicate, it seemed impossible that it could open the heavy, utilitarian lock. But when I inserted it, it turned with a satisfying, oily click. With trembling hands, I lifted the lid of the box. The first thing I saw was money. Bundles of cash, old $20 and $50 bills, wrapped tightly in twine. I lifted one bundle out, then another and another. I spread them out on the floor around me. It was a staggering amount. I couldn't count it precisely in the dim light, but it had to be thousands, maybe tens of thousands of dollars. More money than I had ever seen in my life. This was it. This was the inheritance. A secret stash of cash saved by a reclusive old woman. It was a ticket out. I could leave this place, go anywhere, start a new life. The relief was so intense it was dizzying. I wouldn't have to go to a shelter. I wouldn't have to scrape by. I was safe. I laughed, a short, sharp sound that was swallowed by the cabin's silence. It was a crazy, unbelievable turn of events. I ran my hands over the stacks of bills, the paper dry and foreign against my skin. My mind was racing, imagining the possibilities. A decent apartment, new clothes, maybe even a car, a normal life. But as my fingers brushed the bottom of the box, they touched something else. Paper. I pushed the last of the money aside. Lying at the very bottom was a thick, cream-colored envelope. My name, Leo, was written across the front in a shaky but elegant script. It was her handwriting, the same script from the margins of the poetry book. This was not a typed, impersonal note. This was a letter. From her. To me. Suddenly, the money seemed unimportant. My heart hammering against my ribs, I carefully picked up the envelope, broke the brittle wax seal, and unfolded the pages within. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, casting a warm, soft light on the pages as I began to read. My dearest Leo, the letter began. If you are reading this, it means I am gone and you have found your way home. I am sorry. Those are the first words I must write, and they are the most inadequate. I am sorry for the life you have had. I am sorry I was not in it. Please do not believe I abandoned you. Everything I have done, every day I have spent in this place, has been for you. The words blurred through the tears that welled in my eyes. I wiped them away impatiently, my entire being focused on the looping script on the page. She wrote that she hadn't been sick, not in the way the state records probably said. She had been in danger. A powerful corporation had discovered something valuable on her land and had been trying to force her to sell for years. They started with lowball offers, then moved on to intimidation, threats. They were ruthless, and she knew they wouldn't hesitate to use a small child as leverage against her. She couldn't protect both you and the land, she wrote. So she made an impossible choice. She arranged for me to be taken into the state system, creating a false paper trail that painted her as an unfit, unstable guardian who had wandered off. It was a lie to make me disappear, to keep me safe until I was old enough to be legally untouchable. She had to become a ghost to save me. The money in this box, she continued, is everything I saved over 30 years. It is for you to start a life, to buy a car, to get an education, to do whatever you dream of doing. It is your security, your fresh start. Use it and be free. But know that it is not your true inheritance. The money is just a tool. Your inheritance is this land, these trees, this silence. It may not look like much to you now, a broken-down cabin and a patch of woods, but it is a sanctuary, Leo, a place apart from the noise and the greed of the world, and it is in grave danger. The letter ended with a strange, cryptic instruction. They will try to take it from you just as they tried to take it from me. They will offer you a fortune. Do not listen. The truth of this place is not in what is buried in the house, but in what is rooted in the forest. When you are ready, find the heartwood. It will show you what you are fighting for. I read the letter 3 times, the words sinking deeper into my soul with each pass. The story of my life, the one I had told myself for 15 years, that I was an unwanted child, abandoned by a family that didn't care, was a lie. It was all a lie. I hadn't been abandoned. I had been protected. My grandmother hadn't been a ghost. She had been a guardian, a silent sentinel watching over me from afar. The grief was a physical blow. I cried for the years we had lost. I cried for the woman who had lived and died alone in this cabin, all for me. I cried for the little boy who had felt so utterly alone in the world. And mixed with the grief was a white-hot rage. Rage at the faceless corporation that had stolen my family from me. Rage at the system that had never bothered to look for the truth. I sat there for hours, the letter clutched in my hand, the money scattered around me like fallen leaves. The cash that had seemed like a miracle just an hour before now felt like a burden, a test. She had given me a choice. Take the money and run, or stay and fight for this place, freedom or inheritance. What did I even know about fighting? I was an 18-year-old kid with no resources, no power. The idea was insane. But the thought of walking away, of letting her sacrifice be for nothing, that felt like a betrayal I couldn't live with. Okay, I need to pause here for a second. If you've ever discovered a truth about your family that changed everything you thought you knew, I want you to know you're not alone. This is the kind of story we share here. It's about finding our way through the wreckage of the past to build something new. It's about understanding that the people we love sometimes make choices we can't comprehend, choices born from a fierce, desperate need to protect us. If that resonates with you, take a moment to hit that like button and maybe share in the comments what the word inheritance means to you. It's not always about money, is it? Sometimes it's a story, sometimes it's a fight. Now, let's get back to the cabin because what I found next, it changed the game completely. The next few days passed in a blur of activity and contemplation. I used some of the money to buy supplies in town. Gus drove me, asking no questions, though his gaze was knowing. I bought an axe, a second-hand chainsaw, tools, and enough food to last for weeks. I started working on the cabin, patching the roof, clearing the overgrown yard, replacing the broken window panes. The physical labor was a balm, quieting the storm in my mind. With every swing of the hammer, every log I split for the fire, I felt a deeper connection to this place, to her. I was no longer just visiting. I was inhabiting her life, picking up the threads she had left behind. But her final words from the letter haunted me. Find the heartwood. What did it mean? I searched the cabin again, more thoroughly this time, but found nothing. The clue had to be outside. I started exploring the land, venturing farther into the forest each day. The woods were ancient, majestic. The trees were enormous, their trunks thick as columns in a cathedral, their tops lost in the sky. The air was clean and alive. It was a place that felt sacred, untouched. I understood why she had fought to protect it. It wasn't just a collection of trees. It was a living, breathing entity. My search led me to the dilapidated barn. It was mostly empty, filled with the smell of hay and decay. In a dusty corner, tucked away under a pile of old burlap sacks, I found a wooden chest. Inside were more of her belongings, tools for woodworking, dried bundles of herbs, and at the bottom, a rolled-up canvas map. I carefully unrolled it on the barn floor. It was a hand-drawn map of the property, detailed and precise. She had marked the streams, the clearings, the different types of trees, and there, near the northern edge of the property, was a drawing of a single massive tree, far larger than the others around it. Next to it was a single capital letter, H, Heartwood. It took me half a day to find it, hiking through dense undergrowth, following the map's careful markings, and then I saw it. It was an ancient Douglas fir, a true giant of the forest. It had to be hundreds of years old. Its trunk was a gnarled, moss-covered fortress, and its lowest branches were 50 feet off the ground. It was the king of this forest, the heart of it all. I walked around its massive base, running my hand over the rough bark. I felt a sense of awe, of reverence. At the base of the tree, tucked into a hollow space concealed by a curtain of thick roots, was another container. This one was a large, modern, waterproof pelican case. It was heavy. I dragged it out into the open and unclipped the latches. My heart was pounding. This was it, the final piece of the puzzle. Inside, there were no sentimental objects, no more cash. There were only documents, stacks and stacks of them, all meticulously organized in folders. There were geological surveys filled with technical data and maps of the bedrock beneath the property. There were legal papers, copies of threatening letters from a law firm representing a company called North Star Development. There were sworn affidavits from other local landowners who had been harassed and bought out by the same company. And there was a thick report from a geologist my grandmother had secretly hired. I sat there on the forest floor, under the shadow of the great tree, and read for hours. The truth, when it finally came, was colder and harsher than I could have imagined. My grandmother's land, this sanctuary, sat atop one of the purest and largest deposits of silicon quartz in North America, the kind of quartz essential for manufacturing high-end electronics, microchips, and solar panels. It was worth a fortune, not millions, hundreds of millions. North Star Development had been trying to acquire the land for over 2 decades. They had systematically bought up all the surrounding properties, isolating her. When she refused to sell, they began a campaign of intimidation. The documents laid it all out. Illegal surveillance, trespassing, veiled threats. It was all there, a detailed chronicle of one woman's long, lonely war against a corporate giant. At the very bottom of the case was one last letter from her. "My Leo," it read, "now you know the truth. This is the monster I was fighting. They will have learned of my death by now, and they will know the property has passed to you, an 18-year-old boy with nothing to his name. They will come. They will arrive with a smile and a checkbook, and they will offer you a sum of money so large it will make your head spin. It will sound like the answer to every prayer you've ever had. 5 million, maybe 10. It will seem like a fortune. Do not be fooled. It is a pittance compared to what this land is worth to them, and it is nothing compared to what they will destroy to get it." Her words seemed to lift from the page, her voice a clear, steady whisper in the quiet woods. "This land is more than the rock beneath it, Leo. This forest is one of the last old-growth stands in this region. The water that flows from it is the purest in the state. It is a living, breathing miracle. To sell it to them would be to sign its death warrant. They will tear it down, blast it open, and poison the water, all for the sake of profit. They will leave behind a dead, barren pit. I have given you the evidence to fight them. I have given you the money to start that fight. But I cannot make the choice for you. You can take their money and live a life of comfort. No one would blame you. Or you can stay. You can fight. You can become the guardian of this place. The choice is yours, my grandson. But I pray you choose to protect the roots." I sat there until the light began to fail, the cold of the forest floor seeping into my bones. The choice she laid out was stark, brutal. On one side, a life of unimaginable wealth and ease, an escape from everything I had ever known. On the other, a difficult, uncertain, and likely losing battle against a ruthless, powerful enemy. For a moment, I let myself imagine it. The $5 million, the beautiful apartment in a new city, the fast car, the freedom from worry. It was a seductive dream, a fantasy I had clung to in the darkest nights at the orphanage. It was everything I had ever wanted. But then I looked up through the canopy of the great fir tree at the sliver of darkening sky. I thought of my grandmother alone in her cabin, fighting this battle in silence for 30 years. She could have sold. She could have taken the money and lived a life of luxury. But she didn't. She chose this. She chose the trees, the silence, the struggle. She chose to protect something pure. She had given up her life and her grandson for this principle. How could I, holding the truth of her sacrifice in my hands, choose any differently? The dream of the money turned to ash in my mind. It wasn't a dream of freedom, it was a dream of forgetting, and I would not forget her. I packed the documents carefully back into the case. My choice was made. I would stay. I would fight. It was almost as if she had predicted the very hour of their arrival. 3 days later, as I was splitting wood in the clearing, I heard the unfamiliar sound of a high-end engine struggling up the dirt road. A sleek, black sedan, ridiculously out of place in this wilderness, pulled up beside the barn. It was caked in mud, a testament to the driver's determination. A man in an expensive tailored suit stepped out. He was in his 50s with perfectly coiffed silver hair and a smile that was all teeth. He looked at the cabin with an expression of faint disgust before his eyes landed on me. "Leo Vance?" he asked, his voice smooth and practiced. He walked toward me, hand extended. "My name is Richard Davies. I'm an attorney with North Star Development. I've been trying to get in touch with you." I didn't take his hand. I just leaned on my axe, my knuckles white. "I'm not hard to find." His smile didn't falter. "Indeed, my sincerest condolences on the passing of your grandmother. She was a very determined woman." The way he said it was not a compliment. "We had been in negotiations with her for years regarding this property. I'm here today to renew our offer directly to you." He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a sleek, leather-bound folder. He opened it, revealing a contract and a cashier's check. My company is prepared to offer you $5 million for this land, effective immediately. All you have to do is sign, and all your troubles will be over. You can walk away from this rustic setting and start a new life, a better life. $5 million. The number just hung there in the crisp mountain air. I looked at the check, at the long string of zeros. It was a king's ransom. It was the easy way out. It was the ultimate temptation. I thought about the cold nights at the orphanage, the gnawing hunger, the feeling of being worthless, of having nothing. That check could erase all of it. It could buy me a new past. But then I looked past him, past his expensive car and his predatory smile. I looked at the dark, silent wall of the forest, the ancient trees that my grandmother had given her life to protect. I saw the heartwood in my mind, standing tall and defiant. I heard her voice from the letter. It is a living, breathing miracle. I looked back at Davies, and for the first time in my life, I felt a strength in me that was solid and unshakable. It was her strength. "The land's not for sale," I said. The smile finally vanished from Davies's face. It was like a mask dropping. The charm evaporated, replaced by a cold, reptilian hardness. "I don't think you understand, son. This isn't a negotiation. That's a one-time, generous offer. You're an 18-year-old kid with nothing. We are a multi-billion-dollar corporation. Do you really think you can stand in our way?" "I'm not moving," I said, my voice quiet but firm. He let out a short, humorless laugh. "You're making a monumental mistake. We will get this land. We can keep you tied up in litigation for the next decade. We'll drain every last cent of that little nest egg your grandmother left you on legal fees. We'll claim eminent domain. We'll find a dozen environmental loopholes. By the time we're done, you'll have nothing but this pile of rotting wood. Sign the paper, kid. It's your last chance." His threats were real. I knew that. I had read the documents. I knew what they were capable of. Fear, cold and sharp, pricked at me, but the fear was overwhelmed by something else, a fierce, protective rage. This was my home. He was a trespasser. "Get off my property," I said, lifting the axe slightly. Davies's eyes narrowed. He held my gaze for a long moment, then slowly, deliberately, he closed the folder. "Have it your way," he hissed. "You'll regret this." He turned without another word, got back into his mud-splattered sedan, and drove away, his tires spitting gravel. I stood there, my heart pounding, the axe heavy in my hands, and watched until he was gone. The silence that descended afterward was different. It was no longer peaceful. It was the quiet before a storm. The war had begun. The first official letter from North Star's legal team arrived a week later, delivered by a bewildered-looking courier. It was a notice of intent, a dense, jargon-filled document that was clearly designed to intimidate. It spoke of zoning challenges, property line disputes, and environmental impact assessments. It was the opening salvo in a war of attrition, designed to bleed me dry. I took the box of documents my grandmother had collected and drove down to Cedar Creek. Gus had recommended a lawyer in the next town over, a woman named Sarah Jenkins. He'd said she was tough as a cornered badger and hates North Star more than anyone. Her office was a small, cluttered room above the town's hardware store. Sarah was in her 60s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. I laid the box of documents on her desk and told her everything. She listened patiently, her expression unreadable, occasionally picking up a document and scanning it with a practiced eye. When I finished, she was silent for a long time, staring out the window at the mountains. "I knew your grandmother," she said finally, her voice softer than I expected. "Not well, but I respected her. She fought these bastards for years. I represented a few of the other families they pushed out. We lost every time." She turned to look at me, her gaze intense. "This," she said, tapping the box, "this is different. This is ammunition, good ammunition. But it's not a silver bullet, Leo. They have an army of lawyers. They have politicians in their pocket. They can and will drag this out for years. It will consume your life. It will drain that money your grandmother left you faster than you can imagine. Are you prepared for that? Yes, I said, without hesitation. A slow smile spread across her face. Good, because I've been waiting for a fight like this for a long time. The battle that followed was everything Davies had promised, and more. It was a grueling slog through the muddy trenches of the legal system. They filed motion after motion. They challenged the will, claiming my grandmother was not of sound mind. They disputed the property lines, producing their own forged surveys. They sent teams of environmental assessors who trespassed on my land, looking for any pretext to have it condemned. It was a relentless, soul-crushing assault. The money my grandmother had left, which had once seemed like a fortune, began to evaporate. Legal fees, court costs, expert witness retainers. Every month, a huge chunk of it disappeared. There were days when the despair was overwhelming, when Davies's voice echoed in my head. You'll regret this. I would sit on the cabin porch watching the light fade over the mountains and wonder if I had made a terrible mistake. Wonder if I was dishonoring my grandmother's memory by losing her money on a hopeless fight. But during that long, difficult year, something unexpected began to happen. The land became more than just a legal battleground. It became my home, in a way no place had ever been before. I learned its rhythms, its secrets. I learned to identify the birds by their songs, to read the weather in the clouds, to find the best patches for wild berries. I finished repairing the cabin, making it sturdy and warm. I planted a small garden, the physical work of survival, of building a life with my own two hands, grounded me. It gave me a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with the fight against North Star. The community, which had at first watched me with a reserved curiosity, began to rally around me. Gus would show up unannounced with a truck full of firewood or a case of beer. The woman from the diner would pack me extra food whenever I came to town. Other locals, people who had their own grievances with North Star, started sharing their stories with Sarah, adding to our arsenal of evidence. They saw that I wasn't just some kid passing through. I had put down roots. I was one of them. I was Eleanor's grandson, and I was staying. One evening, after a particularly brutal day of depositions, I came back to the cabin exhausted and demoralized. I felt like giving up. I walked out to the heartwood tree, needing to feel its ancient strength. As I stood there, I realized what my grandmother had truly left me. It wasn't the money or the evidence or even the land itself. Her real inheritance was the choice to stand for something. The struggle wasn't a curse, it was a gift. It was forging me into someone I had never known I could be. The money didn't matter. Winning or losing the court case didn't matter. What mattered was showing up for the fight. What mattered was honoring her sacrifice by refusing to break. In that moment, I knew I had already won. The legal battle is still going on. Sarah thinks we have a real chance now, especially with the evidence of North Star's long-term harassment campaign. The local news has picked up the story, framing it as a David versus Goliath fight, and public opinion is on our side. But the future is still a long, uncertain road. North Star won't give up easily. There are days I wake up and the weight of it all feels heavy on my shoulders. The money is almost gone. My life is simple, sometimes hard, but I have never, not for 1 second, regretted my choice. I am no longer the lost, lonely kid who stepped off that bus a year ago. I am a guardian of this place. I am my grandmother's legacy. I have a home, not because it was given to me, but because I have chosen to defend it. I have a community that stands with me. I have a purpose that gets me out of bed every morning. My grandmother couldn't give me a childhood filled with love and warmth, but she gave me something far more valuable in the end. She gave me the chance to build a life of meaning, a life of substance. She taught me that home isn't a place you are given. It's a place you fight for. It's not about the deed or the property lines. It's about the roots you put down, the stand you take. It's the story you choose to live. So the fight continues. I don't know if I'll win in the legal sense, but I've already won what matters. I found my home. I found my story. And that brings me back to you. Maybe your inheritance wasn't a piece of land. Maybe it was a lesson from a grandparent, a core value, a promise you made to someone you loved and lost. Maybe you're fighting your own invisible battle against a system, a corporation, or a circumstance that feels too big to beat. I want you to write it down in the comments below. Not for me, but for yourself. And for every other person here who needs to know they aren't fighting alone. What is the real inheritance you are fighting to protect? This channel is a place for those stories. Subscribe and join a community that understands that the richest lives are built not on what we are given, but on what we choose to defend. Thank you for listening.